So
Okay.
she also starts doing really weird stuff. Like she finds a coffin on sale for $30
She's
while he is
thrifty.
sick. She's very thrifty and she's so excited. She's like, I got the best deal ever. So she buys this casket and she asks her landlord, can I leave this in the basement since, Frank's not long for this life or whatever? And the landlord was like, I don't love it. Um,
This is a Main Hustle Media podcast.
Virtual Reality Studios. A new realm of creativity. Welcome back to Matcha, Masala and Murder. Thank you. A weekly true crime podcast with me, one of your co-hosts, Rhia Kaur, and your other co-host,
Sharmane Fury, your Sir Auntie.
Thank you. And I almost got the point right. I hedged my bets and went both ways.
You just did it both sides. Yeah, that worked.
Out.
I've now taught myself go towards the microphone, and then I will be facing.
Oh, and I'm away of okay, nice.
Yes.
Yeah,
so in
good.
my case, it's this. Yes.
Thank you. Handy tips. So welcome back. And so this week, Sharmane is going to spill the tea on a tasty and tantalizing true crime tale. But before we get into that, I am going to give you a little bit more of my tea chat. So a while ago, I shared some of the origins of the different words that we have for tea and the etymology of the language, and we did all of that and how the trade routes corresponded with the different words in different languages.
And so I have actually been using that phrase that you said on that episode, which I think was one episode prior to our holiday break.
Yeah,
the tea if by sea, cha if by land.
I know it's so disappointing that it doesn't rhyme on both sides, but it is what it is. We can't have everything in life.
I've done it in my head a couple times when I've had something pop up. I'll be like, tea if by sea,
I love it. Yeah. So today I thought I would take you to the second half of my kind of tea research and where that's taken me. And this is just a little potted history that I like to call, is tea the root of all evil?
Oh, yes. I've heard you say this before, so I'm looking forward to learning about it.
May just be.
It might be like literal colonization based around tea.
Right?
Yeah, okay.
I think I went through a little bit of this before. So we talked about how tea was really medicinal at first. It was like a tincture, but it was really in England, it was really popularized because Charles II's wife, King Charles II's wife, Catherine of Braganza, was very, very keen on tea. And she learned about tea from the Portuguese, because we also talked about the trade routes, and the Portuguese pretty much had it first. It was very fashionable. So she really loved it. And then because all the ladies in society wanted to be like her, they started drinking it too. But it tasted like shit, basically, in those days. So although we were all like, oh, yes, like we've got to do what the Queen's doing, like it's nasty. So that's kind of how it spread. But in England at that time, we did call it cha. And then it would, because that we got it from the Portuguese, and then it would become known as tea in the UK, which would be a bit different. So we had cha and then tea. And then obviously now you can go to your Starbucks that we're not going to these days, but that would be called chai something. And, you know how I feel about that. So, we have to be very careful with those terms. But anyway, the answer.
Chai tea latte.
Tea milk. The answer to all of this, of course, as you have already stated, is fucking colonialism, our old friend. So.
Yes. Which we wouldn't exist in the capacity that we exist in had it not been for.
True. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm grateful. I don't
you're from all these different cultures? Yeah, guess how it happened.
Yeah. Funny story. Yeah, exactly.
So some white people got on boats and
yeah, that's pretty much how it went down. Speaking of which, England was drinking so much tea, and this tea was coming from China, and the prices England decided were too high. And it took too long to get here because China's really far away. And they couldn't import enough of it quickly enough to satiate the people who wanted all the tea in England. And China at this time was also supplying Portugal with tea. And Britain decided the reason we couldn't get enough and the price was too high was because Portugal was our competitor in getting the tea. So they were like, we need to come up with a plan to screw over these Portuguese so that we can get all the tea for ourselves. So they tried to strike an exclusivity deal with China. And I'm sure it wasn't called an exclusivity deal, but that's what I'm calling it. So basically like, hey, don't sell it to those guys anymore. Just give us the tea. We're the best ones. And China were like, what will you trade me for this tea? And then they were like, well, we don't make a lot of stuff here. Yeah. They're like, we don't make a lot of stuff here and we don't really grow a lot of stuff that you guys eat. And then China was like, yeah, you got nothing we want. So no, we're not doing an exclusive trade deal with you because you haven't got anything we want to trade with. So England was like, okay, if we can't have it, no one will. So they set out to manipulate the markets, and they made this whole big play. And obviously I'm making this sound really like lighthearted, but it was a big deal. And especially in the New World, the Americas, and the Boston Tea Party, anyone, there were issues with taxes and all the finances were going crazy and trades here and import there. And basically it all didn't work and China wasn't playing ball and doing what they wanted. So they were like, okay, now we need to come up with another plan. So what shall we do? So England, aka the East India Company, because that was also the English government, started growing opium in South Asia. And then they sold the opium to China in exchange for tea, because finally the English had worked out something they could grow that China wanted.
I did not know that the British are responsible for the opium issues.
So they were like, China wants opium. We haven't got anything else to give them. We can't grow it here. But you know what? We own all this land in South Asia. So we're just going to grow shitloads of it there. And then we'll finally have something to sell. So why did the Chinese need/want more opium? Because they had recently got their hands on special long pipes that also came from South Asia, which meant that the hit was much greater and it lasted much longer. And so addiction was fucking rife. People, like, just by the turn of like the 20th century, Britain had basically become the biggest drug dealer in the world because of how much opium they were selling to China, because China had developed the biggest drug addiction problem ever experienced by any nation at this point.
Oh my gosh.
So this is just all because
just so we can have a cuppa.
Tea, right? All because England were like, how dare you not sell us the tea? I want to be your favorite child. Fuck Portugal. Portugal's getting more tea than me and it's not fair.
Wow.
And so then they were like, I know what we'll do. We'll just feed into your addiction. Here, have all this opium. And this, of course, led to the Opium Wars, which is a pretty famous thing that happened. Loads and loads of Chinese people were addicted. And the government then were like, we're paying all this money and it's getting too expensive to get all this opium and we can't get enough of it. A bit like us with the tea. We can't get enough quickly enough. They seized a massive shipment off British ships and Britain got pissy about it and they were not happy. So then, like, there was the wars and, like, with overwhelming force, Britain actually defeated China, or China, the people who were involved in this particular opium war at this time. And then they made a deal so that the trade routes would be opened up, and then Britain took control of Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And then didn't give it back until 1997.
Until, like, my lifetime. Yeah, like I was fucking grown and shit.
1997.
Yeah.
So we've gone like like the turn of the century until 1997, and that's why we had fucking Hong Kong. And listen, there's a lot of other history here too, and I'm not talking about that right now. I know it exists, but we're just talking
Mhm.
tea, so I'm not ignoring it, but for the
Yeah, yeah.
purposes of this conversation.
It's there.
So,
Yeah.
no. So that's what was going on there. And if we rewind a little bit to when Jesus was apparently doing his thing, if you
Sure.
believe in that kind of thing, I'm sure there was a guy called Jesus. At that sort of time in India, they were working out how to get sugar out of grass. So they've got this sugar cane and they were trying to figure out how to extract sugar. And this would make things nice and sweet. And they had figured this out, and this was a wonder. And so then, they were already doing that, and then they could sweeten the tea. So we've got back all the way back to Jesus' time when they first figured out how to use the fucking sugar cane. And then we fast forward again, and they could put that shit in the tea, which would make it taste nicer. The Spanish and the Portuguese took the sugar cane to the New World plantations, which were established, where enslaved people were then taken to work on them, and the sugar was produced en masse. And now we could put loads of sugar in tea, and tea became for everyone because it was nicer. Now it wasn't bullshit. It actually tasted nice.
Yeah.
So then we needed more tea and more sugar. And so what did we also therefore need? More enslaved people to grow the sugar and the tea and give it to the people who wanted it. So
which is call back to when I said we wouldn't exist.
That's the one.
Because I'm literally a descendant of all these motherfuckers right now.
Exactly. So in India and the Caribbean and in the Americas, they were growing, the plantations were happening. And then in like the 1830s in the Assam region of India, the tea estates were established. And so they got the Chinese plants, they established the plantations, the East India Company established the plantations. But unfortunately, by this point, Britain had said, oh, no, there's no slavery. We've got a ban on slavery now. Slavery bad, don't do slavery. And they went, okay, how about indentured labor? That's, arose by any other name. Kind of thing. So they were like, same thing, different name, and we will get that one, sneak that one under the radar. So tea then became much, much cheaper because we controlled the trade routes and we controlled the plantations and we didn't pay the fucking workers anything. And so it got much, much cheaper because loads of more of it was being produced. Indian people liked it and they were like, let's do what we do and just add a little cultural spice to that bad boy, a little spice. And lo and behold was born Masala chai. And then the English went, no, don't like that idea at all. Because if you're selling me a cup like this with tea in it, but you're going to put spices in, you're using less of the tea plant, which means we're not selling you as much, which means we're not making as much money. So, you might like the taste of it. It might be part of your culture now. But what we're going to do is put a fucking ban on that. So nobody can set up a cart in the street and sell masala chai because we decree that's not acceptable. And basically then the Indians went, fuck off, we're going to do it anyway. So hence masala chai, it sprung up everywhere. And it was almost then this act of defiance.
Yeah.
So what I'm telling you is not when you get it from Starbucks, but if you actually do make proper, or what I would call cha, then you are actively sticking two fingers up to the colonial rule. And it is a little act of rebellion that you do every day when you drink your masala cha.
I fucking love that. Love that
tea was the root of all evil, but now we are defying them with our spices.
You take the tools of the master to use against them.
But then maybe the joke's on us because Starbucks probably makes more money out of that than anyway.
I mean, technically Starbucks makes more money off their cups and their merch than they do on their tea and their coffee. But it's the mark, it's their market thing. Yeah. Also prior to the ban, on Starbucks, or the boycott on Starbucks, their tea was always shit.
Yeah,
I don't the worst brand.
Yeah. My husband's Italian, he doesn't drink their coffee, and I don't drink tea from any cafes like that here because it's all bullshit. So
I do love that. And when you really do boil it down and think about it, I mean, even the
boil it down.
Accidental pun. Even the existence of the United States is born out of that very
Mhm.
similar thing. Like, yes, of course, there was like, the prison colonies and all this other kind of stuff,
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah. But like tea was a part of, like, tea was the thing used to spark a revolution to,
Exactly.
separate America
Yep.
from King George, right? So I mean, plus
I'm
we had the
saying.
sugarcane problem. We had the tobacco. Like tobacco was
Yeah.
also another thing that happened here. Like the
Mhm.
New World gets developed because of the need for tobacco. So
Yeah.
they're like drug. Literally, like I never thought about the drug dealing aspect of Britain,
Yeah.
but opium in China, tobacco in the Americas. Yeah,
Mhm.
this is so fucking wild, and it's
I
really
mean,
just born
and
out of a tantrum.
even before that, if you think of the phrase that religion is the opium of the masses, right?
Mm,
What
mm.
did we also do? Well, we had the fucking Crusades where we tried to take Christianity to, like Asia and Turkey, or which was in Asia, So, we've been peddling shit to quell people, for a long, long time.
Yeah,
So,
it's so wild. No, I think it's a
mhm.
good point to put it in that context of it kind of being the root of all evil. And yet so many of like yours and my cultures are dependent,
Yeah,
like literally
exactly.
dependent
Yeah,
on this as a part of like just like life, everyday
yeah,
life, let alone trade and all that other kind of stuff. Um
absolutely.
that's wild. That's great. I like learning more about it. And I definitely feel like I didn't like something so insignificant, right? Like it's just your daily cup of
Yeah,
tea and
yeah,
it's got all this fucking history. And
exactly.
as like a mixed black person in the United States, something that always comes up is this feeling of like literally everything we do and say is based in racism and we don't even realize
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
From things like fuzzy wuzzy, the term
Mm,
literally being about black people hair, or
mm,
you think it's something so small,
no.
or the term grandfathered in literally being
Mm,
about you can't vote in the United States unless your
yeah,
grandfather could vote, and if your grandfather was a slave you couldn't vote, they
yeah,
couldn't vote, blah blah blah. So it was like literally like every element of something that seems
yeah,
seemingly benign
yeah,
ends up having this like terrible racist past.
yeah,
And
I know.
tea is no different, right? Like it's a drug peddling,
That's the one.
enslaving.
Yeah.
Whew.
And
And
imagine just being like, "Oh, no, you're not giving us what you want. Oh, I tell you what we'll do. We'll just sell you some more fucking opium and, like,
right,
wait till you're all really fucking stoned and then come in and take what we want anyway."
it's so brilliant and diabolical how they managed to. And it's just
Yeah.
this fucking island like that again, you like you said, it didn't produce anything.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just found
Exactly.
other places to or other people to produce for them.
Yeah.
So fucking crazy. And it's also both part of our ancestral heritage.
Yeah. So,
Yikes. Great story.
So that's what I've got for you today. And that concludes my sort of, baseline history of tea that I will be
Yeah,
sharing with you.
I love it.
But more tea chat as we have it. More tea
Well,
news
tea
as it
chat
comes
can
in.
lead into mug chat,
Ooh,
for
nice.
sure.
What are you working
Um,
with?
so when I moved into the house that I live here in Mexico, there was a few. It was a furnished house because we didn't want to have to buy all kind of shit or whatever.
Yeah.
But they had a few items, a couple little pots and pans and
Mhm.
cups and shit like that. And this is one that I forgot existed in this house, but I dug it out today. It
Oh,
says "Gracias
oh,
por tu amistad." It's got a cute little elephant with some heart
that's cute.
balloons, which in English for those of you who don't speak Spanish or know or whatever, it says thank you for your friendship, which is very sweet. I
Yeah.
kind of want to steal it,
But
or
now
at
you've
least ask
said
my
that publicly.
landlord. Ask my landlord, like, can
Yeah.
I take this because it's like a
Yeah.
memento from the house. Um, but yeah, like I forgot it was here. There's also these other little cups which I think I'll probably use for the next time. That is like a set. This is the only mug that wasn't a part of any set. It was
Mhm.
just there. So I assume it's probably something that the previous tenants probably left behind,
Yeah. Yeah.
I was planning on leaving something behind too, in the house or whatever, but I kind of want to
Mm.
take a mug,
Well,
leave a
if you
mug.
want one, yeah, then that
Yeah,
seems yeah.
Plus, elephants are one of my favorite animals. I'm the elephant in my family in terms of, I know everybody's secret. I know I'm the keeper of all the memories and shit like that. Uh,
Amazing.
and so I kind of like it in that respect. So it's very
Oh,
cute, and it's
thank you.
she got a
Good
thick
s yeah.
ass. It's just a big bottle cup.
Juicy elephant.
Yep.
So I've got, this is a lavender sort of striped mug. Now,
Oh, cute.
these mugs are, so traditionally this would be blue and white, and it's this company, it's called Cornish Ware. You call the blue and white stripes, it's Cornish Ware. And they now have branched out into different colors and funky stuff, and they do like limited edition runs. So this is actually part of a set which is like pastel colors. So I think there's lilac, pink, yellow, and like a pale blue. And then we have dark green ones. And anyway, we've got a few different bits and pieces from there. But it's really solid. It's really chunky. They're really like traditionally made, still in the traditional way in Cornwall. It's a really kind of iconic British brand.
Yeah.
Really nearly didn't say that properly. Iconic British brand. But this is a little hint to something which I will be doing soon, which I think is probably going to be on the tickety tock. I am going to be comparing, contrasting, and rating teas from around the British Isles. Coming soon. So there is a Cornish blend tea, which will be featured in that roundup. And I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do it yet, if it's just going to be one little thing or if I'm going to do a little series. Anyway, so this is a hint of what's to come. Cornish tea.
And it has inspired an immediate idea of when I do finally get there, of us traveling the British Isles for the purpose of sampling tea. And hopefully we'll spot a murderer or two on the way and solve a crime or something like that.
I think it's
our dream. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that series.
I think we're really living up to our name now. I think we've brought back the tea element, because there are times when we don't get around to tea.
We don't get to it,
the mug chat. We always get to the murder. We sometimes leave out the tea.
Yeah.
But it's always in our hearts.
And whenever it can both happen, it's awesome, like in one story. But in this case, like I want to be a little bit more proactive, even in my own life, about learning more about teas, because it is an interest, and I do want to have a tea garden. Like I want to have a proper tea garden where I actually brew from my own supply. It has been a dream. It has been a dream. I would like to have bees and a little tea garden, and I want to have my own honey, my own tea, and so yeah. Are you ready?
I am ready. I could not be more ready.
Okay, because I have a tale to tell today. Tea's ready. Shall I be mother? I'm ready. I'm ready with the tea. Okay. So you and I are both theatrical kind of people. You obviously in front of people theatrical. I'm behind the screen or behind the camera theatrical usually. But we're both theatrical people. I'm gonna make an assumption we're both into musicals. I am.
It would be a fair assumption.
Okay. Based off of personality matches, I think so. Okay, so what I'm not going to be talking about is the exact crime that inspired this particular musical, but it's from the era.
Oh.
We're both familiar with Chicago, yes?
Yes.
The musical, based off of the play,
not
just
the
real life.
I've heard of Chicago,
yeah, Chicago, right? So the musical Chicago is one of the longest running Broadway musicals, like consistently running ever since well, I think it had a bit of a break and then it came back like in the mid 90s or something like that, but it's been consistently running ever since. And it's actually one of the few, it's the only musical actually I've ever seen on Broadway.
Oh, okay.
I have seen other Broadway musicals throughout the country in the United States, but when I went to New York last year or 2022, I went to go see Chicago. I also got to see the very first time a trans woman played a character on stage. Angelica Ross played Roxy Hart. So I have a personal love of this musical in general. Any musical head kind of goes through their Fosse period too. You kind of you want to wear black and be sexy and shit like that, whatever.
Get me a bowler hat.
You know what I'm saying? I mean,
please.
it's the whole thing. It's the whole vibe. I'm really love it. But I've sort of like kind of in the background sort of know that it was inspired by a real story, but I didn't ever really dig in to find out what that story was.
Yeah.
And I don't remember why I did it, but the other day I was like, oh, I'm gonna go look up this crime or whatever. And while I do think it's worth telling, and I do think it's worth telling on this show, in doing so, I stumbled on a different jazz age murder that intrigued me a little bit more. Because one of the things that you and I have been doing by accident, or it's just revealing something deep inside of us, is that we've been accidentally telling stories of murderous women that we don't fully not support.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
So I kind of felt like I needed to counter that a little bit.
Okay.
And get us a woman that it would be really tough to be like, yeah, sure, this makes sense.
Okay.
So you with me on this one?
Redirecting the ship slightly. Yeah. I like it.
So this murderess was active at the exact same time of the murders that inspired the play, that inspired the musical of Chicago. The women that inspired Chicago was Beulah Annan and Belva Gartner. And these were two, I believe, Irish immigrant women or women of Irish heritage and descent or whatever, who did their murders of their lovers and got off in the court system because of their attractiveness and because of their ability to manipulate the media.
Okay, yeah.
What we're talking about today ain't got none of that shit. So there is commentary that can be had, because what we're talking about today is the Black Widow of Chicago, Tillie Klimek.
Oh, it's such a good name.
It's a good name, right? Yeah. It's just an accident, but it's just a good name. Tillie was a Polish immigrant. She was born in 1876 in Poland, and then her family immigrated here when she was still a baby. Okay. So essentially, she is an American, but she was born in Poland, and in 1876, and then they came over to Chicago. And she was born Tillie Klimek, if I'm saying that correctly, which I'm not sure if I am. Any Polish people out there? I tried, like I Googled, I can't make the GB sound, but she went by Tillie. And from 1914 to 1921, she was just out there killing folk. And we're going to get into it a little bit. Despite being raised in the United States her entire life, essentially, she basically only spoke Polish or like a broken English. And that speaks pretty heavily to like the early 20th century, the back home communities that remained whenever you kind of came and stayed living within people within your own community. So she was in a very heavily Polish part of Chicago, and everybody that they knew were Polish, and all the people that they married and dated were Polish, and all of that kind of stuff. So Tillie, she gets married to her first husband, whose name is John McEwich, who they were married for about 18 years. And then in 1914, he dies. He has some symptoms and things like that of some kind of illness or whatever, and his death is chalked up to an illness. Okay. 3 weeks later, she's already seeing somebody.
What? Okay.
So I've seen two different things about this. Most people just said like intercommunity marriages, someone dies and someone shows up and be like, I need a wife. But I've also seen something that said that there was like a Polish matchmaking type of thing. And so like if you don't want to waste a good cook.
Well,
right?
I mean, we women are nothing if we can't.
If you're not a good housekeeper, what are we even doing here? So as I've mentioned, the contrast between like the people who inspired Roxy Hart and Velma Kelly were these hot, flapper girls and shit like that or whatever. People weren't really caring about whether or not they could boil an egg or some shit like that. But Tillie was known for being an amazing cook in their Polish traditional foods and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So again, you don't want to waste a good cook. So either a Polish matchmaking service or just by being a widow in the area in a Polish community, she's got her next husband lined up, and within 3 months she is married again.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, this is real quick. Because again, you don't want to waste that food.
Yeah.
Within just a couple of months, though, husband number 2 don't make it. And husband number 2, I believe his name was okay. So we're gonna have a lot of the same names.
Wait, us? People with the
I know.
same names? We never do that.
Like 3 of the husbands are named Joseph. One's like
Excellent.
a McCuquich, one's Rakowski, one is Grantkowski. She's got another husband named Frank Cupstick. Like there's a
Okay.
whole bunch of same name people that are going to pop up.
Excellent.
But her second husband, Joseph Rakowski, okay, first husband, he died of an illness, and she collected $1,000 life insurance policy on his death. They were married for 18 years. They had a child, everything like that, blah, 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 and then he died. Nothing suspicious. We're just moving on. But damn, you got married fast. But also 1914, maybe people got married fast. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe you couldn't really be a woman on your own for too long anyway.
Right, the bank account thing, the housing thing,
exactly.
whatever. So it kind of it kind of doesn't spark any suspicion.
Okay, yeah, we'll let that one slide for now.
We'll let it slide, right? So she gets with Joseph too, Rakowski, and he has a life insurance policy of $2,000. He don't make it, but just a few months. He also seemed a little bit sick, but by this point, some people are just like, wow, you're really unlucky.
Wow.
And I don't know if this happens before or if it happens around this time, but she starts predicting when people or dogs in the neighborhood are going to die. She would say she had a dream and something came to her and she could just be aware. So she'd like look at someone and be like, you're not long for this world or something like that. And so she starts developing this reputation of being, a bit psychic. And so she does say that she kind of knew her husbands were going to die because of these dreams, but she didn't think much about it. It was just like, you just have a fleeting thought and then, oh shit, they actually died. Maybe I'm psychic. I think third husband or boyfriend, something is happening. I'm not sure of the time periods, but they're very, very close together. But I'm gonna say that it's the boyfriend between the two. She's not jumping directly into marriage right away, but she ends up with another Joseph Grantkowski. And they end up kind of going on a little bit of trip or whatever. He might have been a womanizer, or he might not have been giving her what she wanted exactly or whatever. And they don't even make it to the altar. Grantkowski.
Oh,
why are all these Josephs getting sick? These poor Josephs. So I don't believe she collected anything on that because they didn't make it all the way to the marriage site. But she ends up again with either this Polish matchmaking service or because you don't want to waste a good cook. Husband number 3 pops up, and I believe he was sort of a friend of a friend or something like that. Who he was, I believe he was also widowed. There's a couple of these husbands that had also been widowed too, and so that's also a natural kind of a thing too. So now we're to husband number 3, Frank Cupstick, and he dies very, very quickly also. So she went 18 years before her first husband dies. And then like months before her second husband dies. And I think the third husband is also months too, or maybe a year or something like that or whatever. No. He actually lasts a couple of years, but they don't really get along that much. He also had $1,000 life insurance policy. So she was usually set up pretty decently. Between all these things, because $1,000 or $2,000 back in 1914, 1921, this is some good good and decent money. But when Frank dies, that's when people start to see a little bit of like, what is going on?
Yeah.
So I think
About time too.
it's time to start looking into a couple of things about what's going on. So, with her first husband, presumably she wasn't out there killing or anything like that. She was just living a life, you assume, or whatever. Maybe he was getting boring, maybe he was getting tired. I don't know,
Mm.
blah blah blah. By the time she gets down to the boyfriend, he kind of fucks off for a little bit. Maybe he's not faithful, stuff like that. So I think
Mm.
he jilted, and she ends up not appreciating that or whatever. So that's why they don't make it to the altar. When she gets with Frank, he's all right. There's nothing particularly
Mm.
special about him or whatever, but she's just not the biggest fan.
Okay.
And she starts to predict that he is going to die soon.
Oh, of
Um,
course.
he gets really, really sick, and she starts mocking him while he's sick, saying things to him like, "It won't be long now. You'll be dying soon." And she was telling her neighbors at one point that he has but 2 inches left to live. I wish I understood the context of this. Um,
Mm. You measure life in inches.
yeah, I would like to understand it more. I did try to find it, and I
Yeah.
didn't find anything really substantial, but you know how like there's like
Mm.
phrases, maybe it's something
Yeah, it
that
could just be a
didn't
Polish idiom
translate
or
well.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wish I knew. So any Polish listeners out there, if you
Let us
can shine some
know.
light, I would like to understand, because it's actually really kind of awesome of a thing to say. Like, it's so fucking cold-blooded, right? It's like you have but 2 inches to live. 2 inches of what? Like, is it 2 inches worth of whatever you're putting inside of
Yeah.
me? Or like, what is it? I want to
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
Um,
Or you're
so
2 inches away from the ground that you're gonna be buried under soon.
like whatever it is, it's kind of wild.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
she also starts doing really weird stuff. Like, she finds a coffin on sale for $30
She's
while he is
thrifty.
sick. She's very thrifty, and she's so excited. She's like, I got the best deal ever. So she buys this casket, and she asks her landlord, can I leave this in the basement since, Frank's not long for this life or whatever? And the landlord was like, I don't love it. Um, and then she's also like sitting by his bedside, knitting
Mm.
a traditional Polish like mourning hat. While he's fucking there dying of
Oh,
this illness, and she's just like, do, 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 I'm knitting my little hat. Um, and taunting him and stuff like that. And when he's getting really, really close to death, she starts putting on like music and shit like that, and singing and dancing around or whatever. And yeah, so sure enough,
yeah. Okay.
Frank dies.
Of course he
uh,
does.
yeah, he dies, and she almost immediately gets married to Joseph Kilmick. So Joseph is now her third or fourth
Wolf?
Joseph, because
Oh,
yeah, there's so
yeah.
many fucking Josephs. Let me get to the list of the. Yeah, he's Joseph number 4. So there's 2 husband Josephs prior to him, 1 boyfriend Joseph, and
Okay.
then Frank husband, and then whatever.
Okay, thanks for the tally. Okay.
So I'm gonna call him number 4, Kilmick,
Mhm.
Joseph Kilmick. He, I believe, is also a widow, and he wasn't like the brightest guy in the world, but he was a good worker. He was a decent provider, and they end up getting married like really quickly after Frank dies. And she tires of him fairly quickly as well.
Right. Okay.
And he starts also getting sick. And also there starts to be these psychic, moments of like, I think Joseph's not going to live for very long. And people are
No
just like,
way.
this is happening in too close of succession. Like, Frank lasted a couple
Yeah.
years, but these guys, like, she's not
Mm.
putting in. It's kind of getting to the point that it's assumed she has her next dude lined up by the time she's ready to get rid of one, because there's like later on in her court case, there's this postman who says that he sees her kissing Joseph Gronkowski or something like that, when Frank is still dead, or or still alive and dying and stuff like that. So she might have been. I have an aunt like this who I think she's been married 3 or 4 times, and prior to her divorce, we have met or knew about another guy who ends up being her next husband. And so like, I haven't talked to her in years, but like the dude that she's with now was the dude she was having an affair with when my uncle, who of all the uncles, there's one in particular that I was like, that's my uncle, because he was like my childhood uncle.
Yeah.
I don't think they were good for each other, if I'm being honest. But that uncle was the person she was having an affair with when my first uncle was still married to her. So I think this is like that kind of a thing. It's just like she got next
maybe
guy.
That's why it's handy to just keep getting with guys with the same name, because then you can't accidentally say the wrong name.
And then you could be telling people like, my husband Joseph, and if they haven't seen you in a while, they don't suspect you of having 4 Josephs in your roster.
This is a good
it could all be the same guy. She starts getting really tired of Joseph. I don't think she thinks he's very bright. He's not very stimulating or whatever. And just like everybody else, he starts to get a little bit sick. And I believe it's his brother that's just like, I don't know, there's something weird about this. So he's already kind of cautioning people. He's just like, I just don't know about Tillie and stuff like that. Tillie goes to her cousin Nellie, and she's bitching about Joseph being boring and getting on my nerves and stuff like that. And she's just like, I'm just ready to be rid of him. And Nellie's just like, divorce him. And she says, and translated quote, I will get rid of him some other way. Oh. And the claim later on,
follow-up for that statement, said Nellie. I'm just going to let that one slide.
Let that one go. So the claim later on is that Nellie was like, oh, if you want a different way of doing this, you could just poison him. And that Tillie jumped on it. But given the fact that there were so many other people who died ahead of Joseph, I'm going to make the assumption that Nellie probably didn't have the level of influence that people have credited her for.
Yeah.
But she supposedly was the person who gave the concoction that would eventually be the thing that is poisoning Joseph Klimek. This very popular product at the time called Rough on Rats. Fucking arsenic. It's always arsenic, right? So arsenic was usually readily available because it was used as a rat poison, and you could go into any place and pick it up and stuff like that. You didn't necessarily have to declare who you were to buy it or whatever. Although there's different places in the world and different times when like, oh no, arsenic is actually being used as something else. So you do have to declare yourself. I don't believe that's what is happening at this time. I do believe it was just kind of an over-the-counter product. It was called Rough on Rats. It had, and I have a picture of it, but there's literally like a dead rat on the cover. And the tagline or the motto of the product is, don't die in the house. Because they realized that you could accidentally, in quotation fingers, poison yourself if you weren't too careful while you're out there trying to poison all these rats that you're trying to kill. Other pets would die, stuff like that. A lot of neighborhood dogs that were a bit what's the word? Newsome? That's another word.
Bit of a nuisance.
Nuisance is the word. Thank you very much. Bit of a nuisance to her. She'd be like, that dog is not going to live very long. I had a dream about it, and then the fucking neighborhood dogs would die or whatever.
Bitch is killing dogs.
Killing fucking dogs and men.
Sure, the men, but
the men and shit like that. But like the dogs, these poor dogs.
I don't mean it.
So I don't not mean it, to be honest. Like I do mourn the loss of innocent animals quite heavily in a lot of cases. So Joseph starts getting sick. Nellie is now the quote provider of said poison to help. And the brother of Joseph keeps coming up and he's like, no, we're going to take him to the hospital. And she'd be like, no. He doesn't have much time to live anyway. Just let him die here at home in peace. And he's like, fuck you. I don't understand what's going on. This is weird. I'm taking him to the hospital. So he scoops up Joseph, takes him to the hospital. And the hospital's like, yeah, he's been poisoned by arsenic. So he actually survives because his brother was like, I'm not taking no for an answer. I'm taking my brother to the hospital. I think you've been poisoning him. Very, very good brother.
Yeah.
To stick it out as long as it is, because other husbands, family members had wanted to take their loved one to the hospital, and she's just like, no, he's not long for this world. And so they all died. But because Joseph Kilmick's brother was like, this is my brother, I'm taking him to the hospital, he ends up surviving. But it's while he's in the hospital that they realize that he's been poisoned, and she gets accused of the poisoning, and she's really kind of casual about it. You know, she's like, I don't know anything, maybe it was an accident, or blah 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 blah. And I don't know if this is 100% true, because I saw it in a couple of different places, but the way they would test for arsenic poisoning back in those days was to take of a dead person anyway. They would take a part of your stomach lining and light it on fire. And if it smelled like garlic, if it smelled like garlic, it was like, this person was poisoned by arsenic. Sure. So because of the discovery of Kilmick in the hospital being, and mind you, he was alive, so I don't know what the test was to find out that you had arsenic poisoning when you're in the hospital at this point, because we're talking about 1921-ish, 22-ish. They determined that he's a poisoner from arsenic, and so everybody's like, I'm Minuten bitte, and they go and exhume the prior husbands.
Oh, good. Yeah, good work, guys.
In doing that, that's how they ended up saying that, you know, Frank actually had quite a bit of arsenic in him, and some of the other ones did too, different degrees of it. And there's a mixed review on that, because depending on how people were buried back in the day, sometimes there would have been arsenic present in the burial process anyway. So there's probably the case that there's a lot of people convicted of exhumed arsenic poisoning that it might not have actually happened. But in this particular case, they determined that, yes, all these people had been poisoned by arsenic. And husband number one, they determined that he had enough to kill 4 men in his system.
Because she hadn't quite figured out the dosage.
She didn't know. Yeah, she didn't know what she was doing. And so she was working it out. And so she could get to a point where she was like prolonging it. So they just looked ill for a long time, and people could see them and be like, man, you know, Joe, poor Joe. And it could literally be any one of these 4 guys. You know, poor Joe's not doing so well, and So she ends up getting arrested properly in 1921 or ish, around that time. She's getting arrested, and again with the quips, this one she's real bold. This one, she gets annoyed by the arresting officer because I think he's not being as kind and gentle towards her as she would like, and so she looks him dead in the eye and says, the next one I want to cook a meal for is you. And they're like, this bitch. So she's arrested, and she kind of gives up Nellie while also saying she kind of didn't do it. She kind of goes between, yeah, I kind of did it. I did it by accident. I didn't do it. It's Nellie's fault. Nellie gave me rough on rats. So it kind of goes all over, whatever.
I still love that.
What a name, right? Like,
I want to see the infomercial for like, then you need rough on rats.
You just like, he's like, do you have a rat problem? And this person's just like, like that. Just like, don't be gentle on rats, be rough on rats. So the husbands get exhumed. They decide, okay, yes, there's arsenic in all these bodies. She implicates her cousin Nellie, so Nellie gets arrested also. And then they start to piece things together. Oh, wait, there's a lot of people connected to both these women that have all died of some kind of an illness. So as they start to dig in a little bit further into both Nellie and Tillie, they discover a list of potentially up to 20 people. and several neighborhood dogs. And most of these
Ooh.
people that they're discovering are relatives, cousins, aunts, uh, babies of cousins,
Oh,
sisters
baby.
of boyfriends, of former boyfriends. And the way in which all these people got sick was different types of things, like a prolonged illness, a sudden illness after drinking, eating
Mm.
something. She also Tillie really got into making candy after, I think, husband number 3 died. And so if someone kind of annoyed her, she would make a big show of making amends in front of everybody, like at a church function or at an event or something like that, and be like, we just need to squash this drama. I feel so bad. I have a
Yeah.
I have a temper. It's my fault. Why don't you have these lovely candies that I made for you? And then lovely candies, people would end up getting sick, and boom, they would be dead. And so these could be like church mates or friends or
Yep.
cousins or whatever. So
But
they end up
churches are great. Like, they brings them all to the same
bringing them
place, so
all
she's
to.
got ready access to them. Very
And then it could
good.
be anyone, right? So like you
Yeah.
could be giving your candy to somebody else,
Oh God, yeah, yeah.
something like that or whatever. But what they amass is a list of about 20 people that all have
Wow.
some sort of relation to either Tillie or Nellie.
Mm.
And so yeah, they're like, okay, we're doing this. Oddly enough, when they when they go into trial, they actually only get Tillie on the murder of Frank, even though they
Oh,
went through the trouble of exhuming all those bodies and
yeah.
everything. For whatever reason, they just ended up going with, like, Frank was the most recent. It was the easiest to get.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess maybe if there was that sort of embalming issue, maybe with the, if this was just a nice clean one, they could
Yeah,
they could
they
definitely
could
pin on
just do
her.
it. It
Yeah.
was fresh enough, and then
Hmm.
with Joseph being in the hospital and recovering and everything like
Yeah.
that, it was a whole thing.
Okay.
I think actually Joseph does end up dying
Oh,
in the
she got him
hospital
in the
later,
end.
or it's later he never quite got better. It's something like that.
Hmm.
I realize now that I don't actually, I kind of have it in my head, but I don't actually remember. But I do know he at least is getting better enough that he can get all the way through the trial and everything like that.
Okay.
So during the trial, they march out all these, different stories and stuff like that. And first of all, Tillie is wearing the morning hat she was knitting
Of course she is.
while she was taunting Frank the whole time leading up to his death.
Okay.
And I've seen photos of it. I'm gonna share those with you. It's a decent fucking hat. Like I mean, I understand it to be like a traditional hat that
Mhm.
married women would wear when they're mourning, but like it's a solid, like, craftsmanship fucking hat, and this bitch is rocking it at the trial. She's also fucking taunting Nellie in prison. So they're in
Man.
Cook County Jail,
Uh-huh.
like the
Yeah.
infamous Cook County Jail, murderous
Yeah.
row, the whole thing. They're in that prison together, and every time a guard would come to, like, go get Nellie for whatever reason, she'd be like, "Oh, they're hanging you today," and stuff like that. Like, or she'd come back from, if she was out and stuff like that, and she'd be like, "Oh, I overheard them talking, and yeah, you're the one going down. I'm not going down. You're
Stone
the one going down."
cold.
So Nellie just gets progressively more stressed out and nervous
Mm.
and all kinds of shit throughout the whole point of the trial and everything
Mhm.
like that. This is where I'm going to pause and kind of get back into the whole era of the Jazz Age and
Okay.
the explosion of female murderers that kind of happened in Chicago at the time. So just like Beulah and Belva and a number
Mhm.
of other women who were accused of killing either their husbands or lovers at the time during the Jazz Age, in a lot of cases it was like, jazz, liquor. We're talking about prohibition in the
Yeah,
United States
yeah.
at this time.
Bootleggers.
Things like that. The women of ill repute basically were doing these things, but if they
Mhm.
were attractive enough, they weren't getting convicted.
Yeah.
Or if they were convicted, it was very light sentencing. They weren't hanged, the whole thing.
Mhm.
Until, and I forget her name now that I'm sitting here. I just realized her name is out of my head. I think it's Sophia something, but she's an Italian
Okay.
immigrant.
Oh,
But
okay.
there's a woman who was massively abused by her husband. And so she does
Oh,
admit to killing her husband. She's like, I was just trying to not, be killed and stuff like myself.
yeah.
Yes. She's like, yes, I did it, but I was in danger. And
Yeah.
and so the woman who writes the articles, who ends up sensationalizing the Belva and Beulah case,
Yeah.
writes about her as well with some
Oh.
empathy, but
Mm.
sh she's an Italian immigrant maybe, or there
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
wasn't maybe all that attractive either. She actually
Yeah.
does get convicted and hanged in
Mm.
Chicago prison.
But he had it coming.
He had it coming. He fucking had it coming.
He only had himself to blame.
He absolutely did.
I could go on with the lyrics, but I'm not
We
gonna.
get 100%.
Please continue.
So this was like a tragic thing about this is
Yeah.
that after Belva and Beulah are released, and a series of people that were released ahead of them, the district attorney at the time was like, you cannot convict a pretty woman in this city or whatever. And then you have like Tillie, who's not the
Yeah.
hottest bitch on the planet, and
Okay.
Nellie. Again, these are two slightly older Polish immigrants. They,
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you in the context of their community,
Mm.
what was the scale of hotness and stuff like
Yep.
that. But again, like the fact that Tillie could cook, it's the thing that comes up about her so much is like she was a bomb ass cook. And so
Okay.
people
Yeah.
wanted to, that's
Yeah.
how she could pull as many husbands as
Mm.
she had.
Yeah.
Because they make this whole big fuss about like how attractive Beulah was. Beulah is the model for Roxy Hart.
Yeah.
And she had these big angelic eyes and this,
Mm.
ginger hair, and she's just so hot. And, da, 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 da. And even though she was considered a person of ill repute, it was so easy to look past it because she's so pretty. There's no way she could do this. And then you look at someone like Tillie, and there's a lot of people just like, why she got so many husbands? Because
Mm.
they weren't classifying her in the way that they were
Yeah. Okay.
classifying
Okay.
Beulah. And so they were quite harsh on her. Plus, you're dealing with a jury of all men. And she wasn't doing herself a whole lot of favors and sort of how she talked about herself and how she talked about other people. And so she's quoted in the trial saying things like, it's not my fault if they wanted to die. Again, I
Okay.
don't know what that means. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
lost in translation. I don't know if it's like the gods wanted them to die or they just didn't love life
Yeah.
enough. I don't know what it is, but that's one of the things she says in trial.
Okay.
They would ask her like, but you were dancing the night that Frank died and stuff like that. And she was just like, you gotta clear the energy of the room. Basically, you gotta, move on with your life kind of thing. She's just like, what am I supposed to do? More. And it's like, literally he's still there in her house, just
Okay.
cold or whatever. So she didn't do herself a whole lot of favors in like the manner and things like that. But it seems, given her lack of empathy and the fact that she's towards and who she implicated, which again, who knows if Nellie is actually even responsible in any way,
Yeah.
shape, or form. That being said, a lot of people close to Nellie died as well. So it is assumed that both of these women were
Okay.
killers. It's so like, she's so cold-blooded as a cousin, as a wife. She's just not very kind. So she does end up getting convicted of the murder of Frank, and she ends up being sentenced to life in prison. I think she was supposed to be on death row, but they ended up like not doing that, or it wasn't time yet or something like that. I don't remember
Okay.
exactly how that part happened.
Yeah.
Nellie, on the other hand, does get exonerated or acquitted. She had been in prison for the whole year of leading up to the trial and everything like that. But in the end, there just probably wasn't quite enough evidence to support her. But also, I think it was coming out that Tillie was just so rude and things like that. And Nellie was actually quite sweet and gentle. That I think while she wasn't the most attractive woman on the planet either, I think they felt bad for Nellie. But they didn't feel bad for Tillie. And since the DA also had such a hard on of like, we have to be able to convict women who kill. I think he went in kind of extra hard too
Okay, I
on
see what you mean.
Tillie at this point. And then of course there's just like, oh, this other person died. Oh, isn't this suspicious? Or what about this person and stuff like that. So
Mm.
I think there was a lot of like external circumstantial evidence that was used in support of Tillie getting convicted.
Mm.
She actually is quoted on the stand at one point of someone asking like, how is it for you in prison? Because everybody was always worried about how these, gentle women can handle
Uh-huh.
being in prison and stuff like that. Both that you're again, like we talked about with last week with Julie, with the Aqua Tofana murders, right? It's like you're both the
Mm.
most gentle sex and also
Yeah,
incapable of all
exactly.
this kind of
Yeah.
diabolical stuff at the same time. And she says, "Oh, they're so nice to me there." Like she kind of was like, "It's not bad, it's not the worst thing in the
Okay.
world or whatever." And so she does. She gets sentenced, convicted of the murder of Frank. She gets her life sentence, and she's in there. She ends up dying in prison in 1936. So she
Okay.
was only in prison for about 13 years
Mhm.
before she died. Nellie goes on to live her life or whatever. I do think Nellie also had multiple husbands and things,
Mm.
and maybe she was killing.
Mhm.
There's certainly some things to support that there was some cousins that didn't make it
Okay.
from Nellie and shit like that. So it's kind of a
Uh-huh.
combination of like, was it Nellie? Was it Tillie? Was it the
Yeah.
both of them? Were they in cahoots? But given how hardcore Tillie was towards Nellie, I don't know that they were necessarily in cahoots or whatever. But
Mm.
the death toll that is racked up, attributed to Tillie, is 20 people, and it ranges from as young as like 2 years old, granddaughter of a friend, a daughter of the
Mm.
sister-in-law, a sister-in-law, like husbands, sons of friends and things like that. So the age range is as low as 2 to as high as however old the oldest husband
Yeah.
might have been. And these are people that are attributed to Tillie. And the way that they're classified in their deaths is like illnesses, bronchitis, heart trouble,
Mm.
stuff like that. It's not until later that people are starting to identify as
Oh.
arsenic poisoning as the reason why they died. So yeah, so I mean that's it. That's the thing about Tillie. But if you today were to go to Chicago
Mm.
and do the little Googles of the house that Tillie Klimek lived in,
Yeah.
that is still listed on Google as like old lady old lady Tillie Kilmek's murder house, kind of the haunted house, and it's believed to be haunted, because
Of
people be like
course it
that.
is.
The street that it's on has changed the name of it, but
Mm.
the address is publishable. It's available. I looked it up on the Google Earth Street View. Still there.
Uh-huh.
It's a red brick building. But yeah, it's like a not a brownstone, because it wasn't quite that, but like the equivalent that Chicago had of these like
Right. Okay.
multi-tiered home apartment type buildings or whatever. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's on the internet as being haunted. I'm doing quotation
Sure.
fingers because everybody knows I'm not a spiritual bae. Uh, but yeah, she's considered like the most notorious of the jazz age lady killers. They also, Nellie and Tillie combined, are referred to as the arsenic widows.
Mhm.
She's considered the Black Widow of Chicago. But, and this is going to bring us back to another thing we talked about in
Mhm.
a past episode. Uh, I don't understand patriarchy sometimes. At the time that this verse is happening, Tillie's referred to not as a Black Widow. That comes later in life. She's referred
Mm.
to as a Lady Blackbeard, or a Mrs. Black, or Bluebeard. I'm sorry, a Mrs. Bluebeard.
Okay.
And the reason why that is the case is because back in the day, a man who married a richer woman and killed them for
Mm.
their money, because technically that's what a Black Widow is, a woman who
Yeah.
marries a richer person and kills them for the money,
Yeah.
um, not just a husband killer.
Yeah.
A Bluebeard is named from I believe it's Ronan Rual or something like that, Bluebeard,
Yeah.
a man who married a richer woman, kills
Okay.
her to take her fortune. And so ever after,
Yeah.
any man who had done that was referred to as a Bluebeard. The
Okay.
term, and that starts like early, it's like 1500s or something like that,
Mm.
that terminology is used. But they didn't have one for a woman who did it.
Okay.
And so in the beginning, she was referred to as a Mrs. Bluebeard or a Lady Bluebeard or something like
Mhm.
that. And then over time, it molds into the
Okay.
terminology of Black Widow popping up.
Yeah.
And so the reason why I say, like, I don't understand patriarchy, it's like they just have these slew of these, women that have killed their husbands or whatever. And they're just like, what do
Yeah.
we call them? We'll call them a lady version of a man version of this kind of killer.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's been known by a number of things: Lady Bluebeard, Mrs. Bluebeard, Arsenic
Mhm.
Widow, and then eventually the Black Widow of Chicago.
Okay. Wowzers. So that is a big body count. And so I think what's interesting, okay, I'm thinking about this idea of the judge's response to women, and this is across different cases that we've talked about. So I'm specifically thinking about the judge who found it all just too sexy in
Too
Japan,
sexy.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, he was just getting too excited by the whole
I
thing.
can be impartial, but I am super aroused right now. Yes, yes, yes.
And then I'm listening to you're talking about we can't convict these women because they're too attractive, but we can convict these ones because they're not. And I just think that this idea, and then from last week, thinking about the fact that women couldn't possibly have come up with this great big
Right.
plan on their own without us men, little
Yeah.
old women. It's just, when are they going to learn that they underestimate
Yeah.
like women in general? Like, it doesn't seem to matter what happens. It's either they either use the fact that you're attractive against you or for you,
Or for
because
you.
that can
Yeah.
either be good or bad.
Yeah.
And then if you're not attractive, that can either be good or bad.
I
And then if
assume,
you
yeah.
can do the good wife cooking, cleaning thing, that's a good thing or a bad thing, because either you're dowdy or you're an excellent wife, right?
Yeah.
You just can't fucking
You can't
win.
win at
Can't
fucking
win.
all. And
I mean, and
patriarchy
I
is
don't want to win for them, but like, if you can't
like,
fucking
this
just
isn't the arena in which you want to win
yeah,
because you don't really
exactly.
know
Yeah,
what that win is, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's I think this is why these cases end up appealing to us and why you and
yeah.
I are telling so many of them, is because it's like it leads to the conversation of where patriarchy makes it almost impossible and
Yeah.
possible
Yeah.
to be convicted of something,
Yeah.
wrongfully or rightfully,
Mhm.
whichever. You can, like, especially in the case of like Nellie and Tillie, and I didn't get as much into Nellie because there isn't as much
Yeah.
about her available
Okay.
as there is with Tillie. But she's equally dowdy in terms of appearance and everything like that,
Mhm.
in my lens of what I
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
But I don't know, and that's
Mhm.
the thing of why we end up covering things that come from the communities we come from, is because, like, I
Yeah.
can provide the cultural context of something, but
Exactly.
like I don't know. Oh, actually, that sparks a memory. So a friend of ours, from years ago, from my husband's philosophy program or whatever,
Mhm.
they were Chinese from well, she was Taiwanese, her husband was from Hong Kong,
Okay.
and she was, in like Western standards, attractive,
Mhm.
but her husband in Western standards would have been really nerdy and stuff like that. And I remember Tristan kind of asking her, like, what's the deal with you and
Ah!
kind of a thing. And she's like, what, he's, good provider, good husband, he makes a lot of money, he's educated and stuff like that. And he's like, yeah, but is he hot? Because she would kind of complain about
Mhm.
him
Okay.
not being more fulfilling in stuff like that.
Right.
And she was like, we don't really have the concept of hot the way you're thinking. She's like, so
Ooh.
in her context, he was the equivalent of getting the best type of
Uh-huh.
partner because he was a good provider, he was
Yeah.
educated, and he had a good job. And so as
Mhm.
long as he could afford all this type of stuff, even though she was an educated person in her own power and
Yeah.
her own things like that, it was still like a status symbol to have
Uh-huh.
not necessarily a physically attractive husband, but like a good provider and all this other kind of
Mhm.
stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas on the flip side of that, she would have been a prize because she was more attractive than he
Yeah,
was.
of course.
That
Yeah.
being
Okay.
said, he would put down certain physical attributes of her because she wasn't as like, as perfect. Like she didn't have as small a nose, or she didn't have so he would say stuff like that.
Oh,
And I think
no.
that's what would trigger the question, like, why would you
Yeah,
be
yeah,
with
yeah.
someone who would talk to you like that? And if
Yeah.
he isn't hot, and
Yeah.
the question of hotness, we ended up having this big discussion about like what
Mhm.
is hotness in that culture for
Yeah.
them.
Mhm.
And so that's sparking that idea right now in this
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah.
It's like, was the fact, because it comes up so often, how good a
Mm.
cook she was.
Mm.
Even if you were a little bit suspicious of her, was taking the risk because she was such a renowned cook
Yeah.
worth it? Kind of a thing. Like maybe she doesn't kill in
Mhm.
these husbands, but
Yeah.
she can throw down on
Yeah.
some meal or whatever. Like, so in the case of Nellie and Tilly both, like I don't know if in their culture would they have been conventionally like, and I don't want to use terms like
Yeah.
attractive or anything like that, but like sought after in terms of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
as a partner.
Well, I wonder if, because okay, so I'm thinking about this from the point of view of their community. You want to stay married within your community because you've got religion and culture that
Mhm,
tie you together. So you want a wife who can cook the traditional food that you're used to, the way you like it,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
Um, so does it matter that she cooks it well, or is it most important that she just can cook it? And
Yeah,
men probably wouldn't be able to cook at all in
at this
those
time, right?
days. And so from their point of view, they're like, well, if I don't have a wife, I'm not eating. And from the wife's
Yeah,
point of view, they're like, if I don't have a husband, I'm not living because I can't
right.
get any money. I can't own a house. I can't, there's only certain
Hence, like
jobs that
those
women
quick
can work.
marriages right
Yeah.
after,
So,
yeah.
and also because she was married the first time for 18 years, that puts her in a certain age bracket where other men might naturally be widows, because they're
Right,
not
yeah.
murdering their spouses.
Right.
So like, the fact that, someone's already had a wife before, they've maybe had their love wife, and now they're
Yeah.
just in it for like necessity.
You keep me
Um,
alive, I'll keep you alive.
yeah, this is just,
Trade-off.
how we have to
Yeah.
live, because you can't be an unmarried person, because in those days, maybe the gender roles were so stereotyped
Yeah.
that you couldn't actually exist without, unless you were maybe wealthy enough to have a maid or a cook,
Sure.
then like
But
you could be a single
especially in an
man maybe.
immigrant community
Yeah,
in any
yeah,
major city, I would
yeah.
assume in any Western space, but specifically in the United States, the way in which, even to this day, those
Mm,
small immigrant communities are kept so tight
tight-knit,
that, you
yeah,
wouldn't
yeah.
have too many opportunities and things like that.
Exactly,
And
yeah.
so,
You'd have
in
to
that,
snap one up if one came
yeah.
on the market.
And like it literally could have just been like, well, fuck, Frank died at the same time that Joseph's wife died, and so
Mm,
it's kismet, right? Like we
mm.
lined up at the right time, so let's go ahead and do this.
Unless,
Um,
his wife also ate the candy at
or
church.
that, right? I mean, like that's kind of reminding me of the Jolly Joseph
Yes, well,
story,
exactly.
right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
let's take out the wife so that I can
Mhm.
get the husband. So this is the way in which I wish I had more, but it
Yeah,
still sparks a good conversation about the way in which, yeah, like you say, a woman can't really win for the same thing that I might win for, this
yeah.
person might lose for, or vice versa.
Exactly. Because 'cause they're just
Um
making it up as they go along.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, it's happening right now in Texas. The
Mm,
abortion laws are so
yeah.
crazy strong right now. They're literally arguing, the way they're arguing why you don't have legal abortion on the books is also the way they're opposite arguing a specific woman that has been imprisoned
Yeah,
for having an abortion. They're doing the opposite of it, trying
yeah,
to prove that the fetus wasn't considered a
yeah.
person yet, in a state in which they're using a fetus as a person as an argument. So in the
Make it
same
make
state,
sense.
in the same court system,
Yeah,
they're arguing the opposite things. And I don't know what the circumstance is for the woman who's being accused and any other woman who gets pregnant,
yeah,
but that's what's happening, right?
yeah,
And in this case, yeah, like it, the DA is wanting to change
yeah.
why these women keep getting off, because we're
Mhm.
just letting these murderesses go.
Yeah.
And with in particular with the cases of Beulah and Belva, because they were so famous,
Mhm.
um things had to things had to change at some point, like it was getting too
Yeah.
much. And so Tilly is actually convicted ahead of them, but they were in prison around the same time.
Yeah.
And with Beulah, the one who is the representative, Roxy Hart, she gets acquitted. She goes on and she marries again. She has kind of a terrible life or whatever, and then she ultimately dies of tuberculosis. But it's while she's sick that she starts to regret the fame element of her life, right? And you do probably do that at some point. Go like, at the end, like, great, I didn't get sent to prison forever, but I'm known for this thing that doesn't have any substance to, possibly, I don't know. Whereas like with Tillie, I think because she seemed to be fairly of a model a prisoner. She got her meals. She said she was well treated. She was kind of a dick here and there to some people, but not as much as she was to her cousin.
Okay, great. She's
so
improving.
Maybe it was like this release of like, now I don't have to be responsible for anything like that, and so now she's just kind of being like the best version of herself because that responsibility was taken away from her. Like I really have a lot of questions about what even was her motivation, because yes, you're collecting life insurance, but you're staying within your community.
Yeah.
And at this point, like, she's stacks on stacks on stacks. Like, she's like 1,000, 2,000, 1,000. I don't know how long that money stretched, but presumably it stretched pretty far in an immigrant community where you don't have to do a lot of stuff outside of your community.
Do we know anything? You mentioned that she had a child from the original marriage.
I think it was like an adult child by the time all this was happening. And so I'm not seeing anything about it, but
that's always interesting, isn't it? What to have that as your mother, like, where are you landing on that? And perhaps,
and I think,
are you benefiting? Are you going to inherit all this money now?
Yeah, maybe not. It might not be the case. And in the case of like the widowers and widows who marry each other for survival, probably, they're past their child. They might be, I guess, in some certain past their child needing to have children phase or whatever, and they just really need someone to keep them alive. From, like you said, the men probably couldn't cook, and the women didn't have the rights. And it's so weird how often this stuff, like in my current situation, how I can apply it in different ways to my life. Like, and now I'm in a position where I have lost my husband. I'm young-ish, I potentially could remarry if I wanted to and things like that, but I don't need to, because I have the right to my own bank account. I can have my own job, and presumably I could take care of myself going forward. And the only thing I might be needing is companionship and stuff going forward.
But you don't even have to get married to have that now.
Right.
Either.
And I don't need to have a partner to have that. I can find different ways to do it. Where in Tillie's case, and again, not justifying the fact that people are killing their partners, there's a mix between, I gotta get out of maybe the situation I'm in, because what I don't know is, were these men abusive? Was there this or that? With the case of like Frank and Joseph, it was literally, the story is literally surrounded like, she just got bored with them. She just got done. They weren't as stimulating as, I don't know if that's all the whole story or just the story that gets told, right? Whereas with her first husband, Joseph number 1, 18 years, she clearly wasn't having murder on the brain, because she could have done it at any time.
Or unless, she just spent 17 and a half years being like, I'm going to get you one of these days. I don't know how yet, and I don't know when, but it's going to be.
And then it's just like, oh, rough on rats. Let's see what we have, Or he really did just get sick and die. And it sparked this next thing of like, oh, maybe there was a sense of freedom I had getting this life insurance, and now I'm on my own. I get married and I'm like, it's not really for me anymore. And then just take out the next one. So there's a lot of questions, even with a convicted murder.
I'm intrigued by this idea that Nellie would say, why don't you just get divorced? Because I would have assumed that that the Polish immigrant community is Catholic, and that wasn't an okay thing to do, because even though they're in the States now, like, religiously, that's probably frowned upon. So I wonder
That's a
whether
really good point, and I didn't
um
think about that when I was researching. Otherwise, I would have probably dug into that a little bit because I
yeah.
assume like there was some sort of Orthodox community or something like
Mm,
that too. That
yeah.
like an internal, a lot of like the Western European Christian sects are like
Mm,
you're a Polish Christian something, you're
yeah.
Greek
Oh, I see
Orthodox,
what you mean.
like
Well,
those
yeah,
types
like,
of things,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So, and some of those would have different rules that might not match
Yeah.
up with other things. But you're right, like divorce is not one of those things that was just like commonly
Yeah,
cool across most of
exactly.
Christianity.
Which makes me
Um,
think, did Nelly really say that? Was that part of the kind of spin that was being
yeah,
like the blame that was being foisted onto
right,
her?
right. Because what could
Or
the
was she
story be like? I'm either gonna kill him
yeah,
or something else needs to happen. And she's like,
yeah,
"Don't kill him. Get a
yeah,
divorce
yeah.
instead."
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
that could have
exactly.
been a
Yeah,
thing or
yeah,
not.
yeah.
Like I don't know, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. But again, it brings us back to, what we were saying last week of the fact that not it's more likely that women are getting married for reasons that are not because I fell head over heels in love
Yeah.
than that, right? And so either because they're, sold off or arranged marriage, or it's necessity or safety or financial or legally or
Mhm.
whatever. Um, but that basically means that they're in this situation and they don't hold any of the power, they don't hold any of the cards, and there's
Yeah.
only one way out because divorce is frowned upon. That's what we were saying exactly that last week.
Yeah.
Till death do us part. Well, in that case,
In that case, you gave me the
yeah.
option that I have,
Um,
right?
and I suppose, I mean, like we're not saying that we know anything about whether she was being mistreated by all these different Josephs in her life. Um, but but we've certainly seen that in the other
Yeah.
women. Okay, so maybe some of the women who kill fucking deserve to be banged up.
Sure. Like,
So,
and I think what makes that more possible in this story versus others is that we
mm,
have this, explanation of how she treated her cousin,
yeah,
in prison.
yeah.
You're going to be happy today. Oh, they're taking you to the
The
news. They're
fuck
going
is
to march
that
you to the
about?
front.
Yeah.
And it's like, are you just that kind of a person that you just want to
Mm,
see other people suffer and things like
yeah,
that? Is that's what's going on here?
yeah.
Or you
Hmm.
know, like I feel like different events in your life to reveal the kind of person that
Yeah.
you are, right? And tragedy or trauma tends to be a big revealer
Sure.
of how
Yeah.
people are. And I imagine it's pretty traumatic to, be arrested for murder, even if you did commit the murder. Um, and then maybe she's just like, "Fuck it, I'm caught. So here's the true colors. I'm gonna torture you
Yeah.
while we're in prison and stuff like that." Like maybe that's what was being revealed. Maybe she was always like that, and that's just not part of the
Yeah.
story that we have about her or whatever.
Mhm.
But it is interesting, and I
Mm.
feel like with all these cases, everything's so complicated in that it's like some of their partners probably deserve things, some of their partners probably don't. Sometimes you can be just a complete sociopath or psychopath. Sometimes you could just be like an unfortunate situation and things happen.
Yeah.
All of these cases can be so, and it could change between murders, right? Like it could be the
Yeah.
case that like you murdered one
Mm.
without the intention of continue to do it. And then because you did it, it
Mm.
becomes a way out in the future, right? Like maybe it was
Mm.
like let's even paint this scenario like maybe Joseph number 1 wasn't murdered and he just got sick and died.
Yeah.
And then she experiences a little bit of independence and her freedom maybe because she's
Mm.
got the money and stuff like that or whatever,
Yeah.
but when the time comes that she has to marry up again and she gets trapped in that marriage scenario again, she's just like, "Wait, I don't actually like this." And then
Yeah.
kills that husband because she had a freedom
Yeah.
from the death of her previous husband. Like
Yeah.
I can foresee that
Mm.
being a thing that might happen.
Or if he had died naturally and then she finds herself married to someone and that had been like a happy marriage, and then
Sure,
she finds
yeah.
herself married to someone and she's like, "Oh, I hate
Fuck
you,
this.
you're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
him and this is a terrible marriage and I've had a happy marriage and this doesn't even compare. So you got to
Right.
go. You
Yeah.
got to go."
I can picture
Yeah.
that too.
Yeah.
And so again, with her, it's a little bit probably less so because she's revealed some elements of her personality that shows like she's not the
Yeah.
kindest. But I can see that in other cases and other things. I mean, like
Yeah.
I'm literally just a couple weeks ago, not justifying, but explaining like how I could kind of see how
Yeah.
Sada
Hmm.
did what did, like again, not wanting to do anything like that, but like I
Yeah.
can see how like a woman in that time with so little power and so little agency
Yeah.
has this opportunity of agency maybe,
Yeah.
and in doing so does something kind of
Yeah.
awful. Um, yeah, I find I don't want to say that murder back in other previous times is more complicated than murder now. I'm sure that every murder is not cut and dry,
Yeah.
but women were
Yeah.
unlucky in that
Yeah.
respect, that
Yeah.
time where they couldn't have their
I mean,
own
and look,
agency.
so okay, if I mean, this is probably the only time I'm gonna come down on this side of it, right? But just for balance, if you're a white dude in this world, in whatever time period,
Mhm.
you know, lots of those have killed people. Loads of white guys have committed murder over the years, and so none of that is. Not all of those are because of terrible circumstance. They were
Right.
mistreated, a crime of passion. Because some of them, sure, some of them self-defense. Of course, there are all these, like we say, it's not cut and dried.
Yeah.
But on the whole, if you're not part of that sort of persecuted minority,
Mhm.
but you're still committing in quite large numbers this
Yeah.
crime of murder, then I'm just trying to say maybe we are giving these women like too much leeway, because maybe some amount of it is just fucking, there is part of human nature. Like
Society.
we
Yeah.
start, well, I think when we really first started this talking about Graham, we talked about what is that part in your brain that makes
Mhm.
you do that, and maybe it doesn't fucking matter if you're whatever gender you are.
Yeah.
Maybe that doesn't actually matter ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I know obviously there's loads of criminal psychologists who would like be screaming at me going, of course it does. I wrote my
Yeah.
entire thesis and life's work on this.
There's so many times when I'm sitting here going like, why didn't I take that criminal psychology class? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
it appealed to me and I didn't take it.
yeah.
Yeah, I
So
it's
I
it's
don't
just
know.
it remains interesting to find both the ones you can relate to, the ones that you can't.
Yeah, yeah,
That difference
totally.
between like what motivated you to do it so
Hmm.
many times and I can't even do it once,
Yeah.
like not can't even do it once. That's such a weird sentence. But like I've not been
Never say never. I think you'd be a really
I would be really good at it, right?
that.
Just like a whole lot of people thought that they would survive the zombie apocalypse after watching Walking Dead. I've watched a
Yeah.
lot of true crime. No. But like yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm constantly intrigued whether I think this person is just a horrible person and
Mhm,
this is what they
mhm.
wanted, or it's a person that I have some empathy
Yeah,
for because life, oppressive classes, whatever the thing is,
yeah.
probably drove them to what they do. Each one of
Mhm.
these are so fucking interesting. Like they remain
Yeah,
really interesting and intriguing, and I want to understand
definitely.
so much about it, which is yeah. So this one again, I felt like I had
Yeah.
to counter our pro
Wise,
Black Widow vibe
wise,
that
wise. Yeah,
a
yeah.
little bit because I do think this one was
Yeah.
probably she probably meant that shit.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Fair,
you know,
fair. No, definitely, that's good. Yeah, like we said, for balance,
for balance, just a little bit of balance.
so,
But yeah, it was intriguing. And, I think in the future or maybe in a TikTok or something like that, I might want to dive into Beulah and Belva.
yeah,
Um,
totally.
Beulah is almost a very close copy to Roxy Hart. Like there's
Mhm.
so the parallels are pretty strong. Belva is a little bit different. She was
Okay.
38 years old versus 23. She
Mm.
was a like a vaudeville kind of cabaret performer or
Mhm.
whatever, but it wasn't like her sister having an affair with her husband or anything like that.
Yeah,
She just
okay, okay.
shot her lover in the car one day and then just I don't know. But she was still attractive enough,
Yeah.
and the intrigue and the fact that like Beulah and Belva worked together in prison
Mhm.
to create a culture around making all the women pretty, making sure they all had makeup. Like they did a
Yeah,
whole bunch of stuff, and
yeah,
that's so they're both responsible for their own freedom, but like the freedom of a lot of other women because
yeah.
they played up to that manipulation. So I think they're both intriguing. That being said, as a flip side of their story, here are two jazz age killers where it didn't go
it didn't work out like that for them. Yeah.
And I thought that was a kind of a slightly more interesting way, because it's like, if you have very little to be able to manipulate the media, how did you get through this? Because you have one who got acquitted and one that didn't.
Yeah, so no, that is a really interesting part of this. Yeah.
I wish I could have found more about Nellie so I could have balanced it a little bit better, but there just wasn't nearly as much about Nellie as it was Tillie.
Thank you so much. This was a good one.
I have like little notes on my thing. It's just like, I have a note that says, "These murderesses are not ones we will applaud." That's one of my little sticky notes I put up there.
Oh, I'm not gonna clap now. Okay, I got you. Okay.
That's so funny.
Okay, so thank you. That was really good. And just so everybody knows, this was the last episode in this current season of Matcha, Masala, and Murder.
Yes.
So we have loved this. We have this has just been brilliant. Every week getting to talk to you and share these stories. And for everybody listening, has just been we've just loved it. We've had so much fun. I'm sure you can tell that we've had loads of fun doing this.
We literally can't stop talking.
Exactly. So we will be back. Season 2 will happen. In the meantime, life's got to happen a bit, and things have got to take place. We will still be recording even when we're not pumping episodes out into your ears or into your eyes. So we will return, and so keep an eye on all the social medias, which leads me to say, follow us on all the social medias, please.
Matcha, Masala, Murder.
Good.
TikTok, Instagrams, and buy me a coffee, and YouTube.
So make sure that you're signed up to all of those, subscribe to everything, then you will always be in the know and you will never miss out on what happens. And also, if you're just really missing us, then that's where we'll be. From time to time, we'll be dipping in and out of there. Don't forget the buy me a coffee.
Exactly.
Because it is a good one. You don't have to buy us a coffee. You can still sign up and just get the free newsletter, which is a little synopsis of all these stories that we're doing. And then from time to time, we're going to start from now introducing and peppering through some different types of posts just in between with some recommendations.
I got a story that I kind of want to write out and put in there.
Great.
So. Yeah,
perfect.
I've been thinking about that lately as well.
Lovely. So more things like that will start happening. So that's the free basis of the content you can get on there without doing anything other than just saying subscribe, and then we'll pop into your email inbox, and that's all it is. If you did want to support us, then there are lovely buttons for that, but the choice is yours. So subscribe and like and follow on YouTube, and if you're listening on the audio, then do it on the Spotify. Please. But you can get us wherever you get your podcast.
Also, on Spotify app, you can engage in a weekly question that we drop on every episode. Engagement like that does also help promote the show through the Spotify app. So that's always helpful. Rating and reviewing across YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and things like that as well also helps support us growing the show.
Tell all your friends.
All your friends. Because you have a true crime baddie in your friend group. You have one. Send the show to them. It will be fun for them. It's fun for us. And, taking this break right now, this really brief break, serves to help me get some of my cats back to the States, because I'll be traveling a little bit. But we already have the episodes mapped out. We already know that we're going to be doing this in just a couple weeks. So we will be back. We're not going anywhere. But it's a nice little break to have this 10 episodes, and
it'll give you a chance to catch up. If you've only just discovered us, there's plenty in the bank there now for you to go back and listen over, so you won't miss us for too long. And that is our plea to you. We've begged enough of your time and your likes. So on that note, we will return.
We will.
I feel like at the end of the Marvel films, like Thor or Iron Man will return.
Sharmane and Rhia will return in season 2 in 2 weeks or whatever it is.
Whenever it is. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm so glad we did this together. It has been, before everything happened for me, it was just a new line of excitement of something to work on. In the aftermath of losing my husband, it's been a balm of, an activity, a thing to do. So I really appreciate it. So thank you so much. And I better stop it before I stop crying.
Oh my gosh, emotion. Ew.
I know.
Okay, bye. Matcha and Masala is produced and hosted by Sharmane Fury and Rhia Maya Kaur.
This is a Main Hustle Media production in association with Virtual Reality Studios. All stories are researched to the best of our ability with information freely available to the public.
This podcast is intended for entertainment purposes, and due to the nature of true life crimes, some information remains inaccessible and new information can come to light after recording.